Hello, everyone. My name is Christopher, and I'm here as part of RPG Fest at the Ann Arbor District Library. I'm delighted to have some guests with me today. I have Marisa, who also works at the library. I've got Phil, and I have John. And we're all longtime players or have longtime interests in gaming. And today we're going to be talking about alternatives to D&D. So D&D has been around a long time, and we thought that some of you might enjoy some alternatives to that and to see what else is out there.
Cool.
John?
Oh, sure. So I will pick a game that it's been around for a while. I've discovered it fairly recently, and it's pretty close to D&D. It's called Dungeon Crawl Classics, frequently called DCC. And I'm not recommending the whole game because I haven't played the whole game. What I have played is there's one particular sort of way to play it, which is called the funnel. And this has been one of my more delightful role-playing experiences in the last year or two. What you do, rather than roll up your swashbuckling hero and your spell-throwing wizard, everybody rolls up. The plot of the game varies, but it's essentially like you're a bunch of villagers and something horrible is happening in the old ruin on the hill, and there's nobody else around. You've got to figure it out. So every player rolls up 3 or 4 peasants, and it's all done on these very detailed tables, right? So if you're the baker, then your weapon is a rolling pin, right? And that's what you have. If you're the farmer, you roll on a table about what kind of livestock you have, like do you have a chicken or a cow or whatever that comes with you into the dungeon. Then whoever survives this first adventure, this funnel, becomes a first level character. So what I like about it, particularly as an alternative to D&D, is that it's very similar to D&D in how it plays in a lot of ways. A lot of people would argue that it's also very different, but what I like about it is it sort of gets people to give up the idea of crafting these incredibly elaborate backstories in detail to making these high-powered characters, and it just says, this is your backstory, right? This first adventure, as the baker with the rolling pin, is the backstory of your character. And when you're done, if you survive, it's also hilarious because people just drop left and right in this game, and it becomes very silly, actually. But yeah, and what it does is it just creates a completely different feel to D&D, where D&D are these incredibly competent, high-powered characters, and in Dungeon Crawl Classics, you are trying to just survive, and there's a certain silly fun in that is not in D&D. So, and then once you've done that one time, you can then play something very similar to D&D and level up your character and make them a wizard or an elf or whatever you want them to be. So it's really fun. So that'll be my recommendation.
Yeah, I just want to add something that John touched on, but like with a group of 4 players like we have in this meeting, we would have like somewhere between like 16 and 24 player characters, and like 5 of them would live to the end of the adventure. Like it's 16, so many. And so like then
I wish I brought it. I have a stamp.
Yep.
It's got a picture of it's like an ink stamp, and you stamp the dead characters, and it says Dungeon Crawl Classics dead, and it says cause of death, and then you write in, killed by a skeleton or whatever. But yeah,
exactly. It's great because like you get really attached to your baker, but they only have 4 hit points. So then like they just die. And that is far different from your meticulously, like John said, crafted spell thrower.
Yes. Yeah. So.
Great.
All right.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah, it's good fun.
Phil?
Yeah. I'm going to talk about a game called For the Queen, which is actually a card-based role-playing game. And For the Queen is great for people that are playing Dungeons and Dragons a lot and want to get people into role-playing who maybe don't really want to roll dice or they're not sure what it's about. For the Queen, like I said, is card-based. You get a deck of cards, and this is how the game plays out. The story behind For the Queen is, and I'll read it off the back. Let's see here. Go clockwise around the table. Sorry. The land that you live in has been at war for as long as any of you have been alive. 2. 3. The Queen has decided to undertake a long and perilous journey to broker an alliance with a distant power. The Queen has chosen all of you at the table and no one else to be her retinue and accompany her on her journey. She chose you because she knows that you love her. And that's the premise of For the Queen. And so you're thrown into this situation, and it's great because there's an online version that's really nice and very simple. And the main mechanic is you pass the deck of cards around, and whoever is holding the deck of cards reads the top card and then answers the question. So after you get the setting, you as a group of people look through a deck of very evocative queen cards to see who your queen is. And then once you've all agreed on who your queen is, that is the queen that you are sworn to protect because you love her on this perilous journey. And then you answer questions just randomly, like, when did you know you were in love with the queen? And then you pass it on, and you arranged for the queen to be ambushed on this journey. What did they offer you? And so you build this emergent story, this emergent narrative, just by answering relatively simple questions. And there's more to it than that, but I like it because you can trick people into playing it. You can just put out, I've on multiple occasions been at a party, oh, we should play a game. Why don't we play whatever? And then I just hand it to someone, oh, read the first card. And they read it, and then now what? And then hand it to the person next to you. And then 4 people later, we're in the middle of the game because the instructions are on the cards. And then as soon as the instructions are done, you get to look at these super evocative pictures of very different kinds of queens. And then you're just playing the game. So it's really easy to get into. A game can last anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hours, depending on how motivated to tell a story the players are. And it really is just a really powerful machine for creating narratives in a really nice way, I think. So that's my close to D&D game.
Is it a little bit like The Quiet Year, which is purely telling a story and then the game ends and the result you have is a truly collaborative story where no one was in charge and you've all told a tale together?
Yes, that's exactly it.
I see.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's you shuffle, there's the instruction cards and then the prompt cards. And then the game ends when the queen is under attack. What do you do?
See, oh, that's great.
And then everyone answers that question. And then the game is over and you've told your story. And as you could tell, the questions get at who are you, your character, as well as your relationship to the queen. And they get very murky and why did you pay to have them ambushed, for example? And there are rules for asking deepening questions of the other players. And then there's ways to make sure that you keep the tone appropriate for what you want the game to be. There's a ton of power in such a small box. It's really nice.
That's awesome.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Marisa, do you have another one? Maybe further out from D&D?
Yeah, I'll maybe briefly mention 2 that are interesting. One is called the Sprawl, which is very cyberpunk focused, if that's your jam. It wasn't really mine when I started, so it was a little bit of a tough entry, but the system is still pretty easy. It's a lot more action-based, so it's very fast-paced, and it has a really cool mechanic that they kind of refer to as just time clocks and countdown clocks. So when you're setting up your cyberpunk future, you also are developing these big corporations or entities. And so then anytime you have a mission, it can kind of call attention to you, or so it can advance the clock, which is kind of just adding pressure every round that you're doing missions, which I think is really interesting. It definitely adds a bit of pressure that you really feel. Right. This fake corporation is noticing who you are, which is very fun, but it's a lot. But it's very fun mechanic. And then the other one is, it's also the same kind of system. I haven't played it yet. I've only kind of read about it, but I'm super excited if I can ever get people together again to play a game in this world. It's called Monster Hearts. And it's the same system, and you basically play teenage monsters. So it's about the messy lives of teenage monsters. So there's different monsters that you get to play, and then you're kind of living your teen life. But it's been highly regarded for its handling of sexuality and LGBT content. And it just sounds super cool. The artwork is amazing. So that one, hopefully somebody checks out and plays and lets us know how it goes in the comments.
Wow, they both sound wonderful. If I could just ask a question, so neither of those are kind of traditional fantasy based. Do you ever have trouble being in a game like that? And I only ask because we've seen a million fantasy tropes. We can quickly think and identify a reaction or a monster or a new plot device or anything. I personally would feel lost in a cyberpunk game. I just wouldn't know how to act, I think, or what makes sense or anything like that. Do you ever face that trouble in a non-fantasy game?
Yeah, I think that's kind of why I initially struggled with the Sprawl, only because that's not really a genre that I read or watch a lot. But you're also kind of building the world yourself, so it can really be whatever you want it to be.
Right.
Which is kind of the freedom out of it. It's like you're still maybe exploring characters in a new setting, but you're also creating the settings, so it can be as outlandish and wild as you want it to be, or as more realistic and gritty as you want, which I think is kind of a cool power to have.
Great, wonderful.
Right. All right.
All right, John?
I'll introduce this. This is the newest game I've read. It just came out. And I'll sort of introduce it. It's called Basin or Basin. Let's see if we can see it here. Here we go. The name of the game, you see a monster hunter here. There's a giant monster over here. You can see he's got a revolver.
Nice.
It's a really nice game, thick book. It's beautiful. And this is sort of a stand-in. There are a couple of companies. One of them is this company, Free League. There's another company called Pelgrane Press, and what they do is they sort of make these bigger, sort of more elaborate books. Like the games that that Marisa was just talking about are sort of more small pressed indie. You can get them for like 25 or 30 bucks. These are a little more elaborate. This book is probably 50 or 60 bucks. They just got it off the Kickstarter. It's like there's no Monster Hearts. Sorry, I was just looking for another book. There's no Monster Hearts GM screen, right? But this book has a GM screen and adventures that go with it. And I bring it up because there are these wonderful, beautifully illustrated, great books that are just a pleasure to read that are an alternate to D&D. So first of all, the rules of this are very different. It uses dice pools, and I won't get into the details of that. But the reason I picked this one in particular is it's called Nordic Horror Role-Playing, but you can really do it anywhere. But the idea of it is that you're just sort of regular folks. You may have some abilities, maybe a doctor or something like that. But, you're not superpowered beings. Again, I'm into this regular folks thing. But you encounter these Basin, which is Swedish for fairies so it's populated with giants and fairies and all these sort of classical mermaids, classical mythical figures that your characters run up against. And sometimes I miss in D&D one thing that I love to play D&D, but one thing I kind of miss about it is there's a sort of sense of wonder when you're playing in a mythic game. So, for example, there's a rule in here, if you're going up against one of the bots and, there are rules to interact with them, they're all more powerful than you, right? This is not about duking it out with them. It's about finding out what their secret is. So if it's a ghost, why is the ghost haunting this place? The solution is not to kill the ghost. The solution is to put its body to rest so that it no longer haunts this place, right? So it's a different kind of play. You're really sort of solving a mystery rather than duking it out, because there's something I don't like about reducing like a ghost to hit points, right? Or how do you hit a ghost? This is more sort of like, how do you interact with these supernatural elements? So it's almost like, it's like Victorian X-Files. Is the way I kind of describe it, and it's pretty fun. And it's also got, one of the draws of D&D is it has these big, thick, expensive books that are just sort of a pleasure to hold and read, and it scratches that itch too. So I've not played it yet, but I really enjoyed looking through it and reading it, and I will be playing it soon.
Wonderful.
Nice.
It sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, and just as a quick aside, so this company also does, they do the Alien RPG, and they're going to do the new Lord of the Rings RPG. They're doing the new edition. And so they do a lot of these big book games that are really fun like this. So anyway, that'll be my second game.
Great. Thank you.
All right.
Phill?
Yeah. Marisa mentioned in the Sprawl that clocks mechanic where, like, as people start to notice things, clocks get ticked, and when they tick all the way down, like something big or good or bad happens, right? Yeah. So that mechanic is also used in a game called Blades in the Dark, which is I should have just had it open. You're in a haunted Victorian era city trapped inside a wall of lightning powered by demon blood. And you are a group of scoundrels trying to claw your way out from being the underdogs. So thematically, it seems very similar to the Sprawl, where like you have a group of people and then they go on missions or scores is what it's called. But Blades in the Dark popped into my head. I have like 12 books sort of laying around. But Blades in the Dark takes that clocks mechanic and really just runs with it. And so clocks in Blades in the Dark can be anything from like Marisa said, like corporations are starting to pay attention to you. So like other factions are starting to pay attention to you, but they're also used for like, in Blades in the Dark, they're called projects or goals. So the clocks are used for goals. And so it can be, I want to find a weakness in the prison to break out my dad. It could also be, I'm building a gigantic robot so that I can destroy the train station, right? Like, and these clocks get ticked when something happens that makes sense for it to tick that clock in the narrative. Blades in the Dark and likely the Sprawl, and probably most powered by the Apocalypse games, are what's known as fiction first gaming, where you describe what's happening, and then if something is uncertain, that's when the mechanics kick in and you roll dice. So until something has a stake, like you just sort of succeed. And then once something is at stake, or if something is uncertain, that's when you roll some dice. And that can either just further the narrative and get you closer towards something that might tick a clock, or it could actually tick the clock. And that's why I like Blades in the Dark, is there's just a million clocks going and you forget about them. And then suddenly like the game master is just like, oh, and that's done. So now this thing happens. You're like, I can't be mad at you because you've been ticking the clock, but I'm really excited and terrified about what's about to happen. So yeah, clocks are a great mechanic. So I'll share that with Marisa.
Great. Wonderful.
Great game.
Well, we're moving into games that might be further afield, further away from D&D. Marisa, have you played anything that's kind of way out there?
No, not really. I got to take a pass on this one. Most of mine have been pretty 5e adjacent.
Yeah. Have you, besides a cyberpunk setting, have you played in any other kinds of settings?
I've played a brief session in Blades in the Dark, actually. It's a lot of fun. I love all the ghosts.
Yeah.
Because I find one aspect of D&D is simply the kind of everything goes world, which really appealed to me for a long time. And now I think it appeals to me maybe less. Where you know, if you can find everything in a D&D world, from mummies to,
Ninjas.
Right. Thank you. In a way, it almost loses its specialness. And So I'm also interested in just alternatives to that approach to fantasy. And there are a lot out there that I'd like to try someday. So, all right. John?
Yeah, I'll bring up a couple. I sort of want to piggyback off, Marisa brought up a great game, which was Monster Hearts, which I would call that a great, in addition to being just a great game that explores something interesting, it's also a genre game, right? Like, it's very specifically channeling the energy from a show like Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And there are a lot of games out there that feel like that for their own genre. So if you love
Or True Blood.
Veronica Mars, right? That's your favorite show. There's a game called Bubble Gumshoe where you can play teen detectives solving mysteries in a very Veronica Mars or Nancy Drew style way. And there's another one. There's one I really enjoyed. I played a few months ago called Kids on Bikes, which, so if you like E.T. or Stranger Things or even Stand By Me or something like that, it's this sort of game of supernatural mystery around a bunch of kids who ride around on their bikes to solve the mystery. So I wanted to bring both those up because I think a lot of people see D&D and they see, you know, these giant books, right, that are terrifyingly huge, and they just kind of enjoy a particular genre or TV show. And there's so many games out there now that emulate those kind of things that if D&D isn't your bag, you know, play Bubble Gumshoe, play Monster Hearts. You know, there's a different game called Monster of the Week, which takes the Buffy the Vampire Slayer angle and approaches it from a more sort of mystery aspect, and is less about the teen feelings and romance. So that's sort of my pick, is to say all these little games that emulate very specific things I think can be really wonderful.
Great. Thanks.
Did it feel like all your picks, Phil, right at the end there? Those were your last three.
Now I have to go get different books. No. No, so the furthest afield that I could think of to get for Dungeons and Dragons is a small game masterless story game about ghosts in a house, and it is called Our Haunt, and it is by Jamila, and it is available on itch.io. And the way it works is it's based on the system by Avery Alder called Belonging Outside Belonging. And there are moves. And so someone starts the story and everyone goes around and introduces their character. And the characters have, much like we were talking about at the beginning, like they all bonds. Marisa mentioned bonds. And so characters in this game have wants as well as bonds. And then also goals, I think, is the way it works. And then instead of having a single game master, everyone goes around and sort of adds a detail to a scene. And then if the scene sounds interesting or like your character should be in it, they're in it. And the way that you achieve things is by saving up strong action moves. And the only way you can get a strong action move is if you initiate and you do a weak action move, which exposes your character to danger. So there's literally no way to succeed without first exposing yourself to danger. There are typical moves, which are just kind of will push the narrative forward, but to sort of do something meaningful, it either has to be a direct loss or then a direct gain. And so I think this is a very interesting thing, in addition to the fact that everyone is the game master. So like whenever you're not in the scene, it's your responsibility to jump in and play. So it's a game about a haunted house and you're all ghosts in this house. And so if there are two ghosts, like if it was the four of us and two of us were in a scene, the other two people would play like humans that had stumbled into the house to like, drink beer because they were underage and it's a haunted house. So they're there to do whatever. And so that's the scene. And then it's up to you two to play those characters and then up to us to have them interact with our player characters. And then after that scene is done, what's the fallout? Who else is next? And then the next people sort of rotate in, but there's never any one game master. The story is entirely collaborative, which is as far away from Dungeons and Dragons as I could get.
I am blown away at how far the hobby has come, how many different genres there are. I mean, Marisa, you mentioned at first Monster Hearts.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that genre or that kind of game would not have come out 40 years ago, you know, or 30 years ago. I think D&D's been around since the late 70s. And so I'm just so happy with how things have expanded, and storytelling and improv and all these other ways of bringing players in have changed so much. And you can still play D&D, something very traditional, or you can play a game that doesn't even have someone running it. That's purely just you and some friends telling a story together in your living room. I mean, it's just amazing, I think. Well, we've heard a lot of great suggestions today. And I want to thank you all again, Marisa, John, and Phill. Thank you so much for being part of RPG Fest. And hopefully we'll all be able to get together again, hopefully in person at some point. It'd be wonderful. So,
all right.
Thanks again.